Welcome to Concept Club, everybody. Another week, another guest meeting. Sorry this one's kind of last-minutely announced by us. I think Ty sent out an email, but this was kind of stir of the moment because we have our awesome guest artist, Amanada Donahue.
Hello.
Let's all thank her amazing sister, Bridget Donahue,
Thank this one.
for allowing her to be here. Or not allowing her, but telling her about this place and helping make this possible.
Yes.
We're really happy to have you. And Amanda, I'm not going to waste any more time. You take the stage.
All right. Well, thank you again for having me. Thanks to Ty, wherever he's at, for also inviting me. And thank you to my sister for basically setting this whole thing up. She's been a middleman. I've been useless. All right. So let's see. Thank you guys for coming today. My name is Amanada Donahue. I am an animator and illustrator, and I work out in the LA area. And so today I want to, tell you a bit about myself, about my work, and about my new graphic novel, The Margins, and kind of how I got started doing that and that whole process. And I really want to spend a lot of time doing Q&A as well, just because I think you guys have questions. Hopefully I have an answer. And I've been in your guys' shoes not too long ago. So especially if you have questions about what it's like working in the field after graduating college. Hopefully I can help with that. Let's see. I'll start by going over a bit about my bio, and we'll just kind of go through the timeline. All right. So about me. I grew up in Michigan. I went to the University of Michigan for about 2 years in their School of Art and Design, but I found that their animation program was non-existent. And so I ended up transferring to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, which is a private art school in Minneapolis. And I graduated from there with a BFA in animation. And during that time, I did an internship with the United Nations Women's Group doing a short ad for their campaign at the time about equality. And then I graduated in 2013 from my BFA. And as you can see on the screen, a little clip from my senior film playing. As an animator, we had to have a short film, a thesis for our graduation. And because my class in winter was literally 2 people graduating, we actually got to have a space in the gallery to have our film playing. So I got to do a whole mural and everything for that. So it was pretty fun. Let's see. To the next slide. All right. After that, I worked freelance for a while. My first job was actually with an independent filmmaker named Tom Schroeder. He was one of my professors at school. And I worked on his film, Isola del Giglio. I can't say it correctly, but I worked on it to developing the color style for the characters, as well as doing some animation for it, which is in these shots up here. While I was working on that, I actually ended up moving to Los Angeles and working on the Rainbow Bright reboot that started in 2014. Went nowhere, but it was a lot of really good work experience. I worked on that just for a couple months, but it was my first job out there in the industry. And actually simultaneously while working on that, I was also still working on the Tom Schroeder film. So I was doing freelance and salary work at that time. Down here you can see a bit from their Rainbow Brights. So that is all done in Flash. I don't know, anyone familiar with Flash animation? Worked in it? So right now that's still being used in the industry. Toon Boom and Harmony are kind of starting to take its place, but Flash is still definitely used. And I learned Flash in basically a weekend before that first job. So YouTube tutorials are your friend. So don't be afraid to apply for something you may not be totally qualified for, because all the time you're just going to kind of learn during the process or just kind of cram it in beforehand, because you never know what experiences you're going to miss. Because after working on Rainbow Bright and a couple of jobs between that, I started working at Creative Capers Entertainment, and I would not have gotten this job I still have now if it wasn't for Rainbow Bright. I got that job because my director on Rainbow Bright recommended me to Creative Capers on a project they were working on at the time. And from there, I had a really good relationship with them for about a year doing freelance work before they brought me on full-time. So working in LA. How many people here want to eventually work in the entertainment industry? All right. And want to specifically try to work out in LA? Okay. All right. So it's hard. I mean, there's no two ways about it. getting an internship or an apprenticeship is a really good idea if you can get it. A lot of them are not paid, and that sucks, and that needs to change. But you can get a lot out of it, especially if you get it, say, at one of the bigger studios. I know a lot of them will then like try to keep you in-house and try to get you a job there for like, say, Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon. And then also some places still have apprenticeships. And those are cases where you are getting paid. They want to train you to be someone who works at the studio. So Disney definitely still has apprenticeships there. Cartoon Network just started a storyboarding academy apprenticeship, and that's paid as well. And then also you can look for internships not at huge studios, like the United Nations Women's Group. That was my mandatory internship for school, and that was a huge thing for getting me freelance work during school. I worked with the woman who was running that, and that was another revenue for work and more portfolio pieces. Connections are a huge part out there and anywhere when you're working in entertainment. The entertainment industry in LA is very nepotistic. They really, if you're in, they'll just kind of like, unless you do something like kick yourself out. If you're in, you kind of keep referring one another to jobs. So it can kind of be hard to like get a foot in to that. It definitely depends on who you know. But a way to do that is through networking. And there's Women in Animation in LA, which I joined like right when I got out there. It has a lot of networking. They have every month they have a meet and greet for people to exchange information. They also do a ton of screenings for films, and a lot of those screenings also have Q&A with directors. So it's a really cool organization to be in. It's not just women, but it's definitely there to encourage, like their new motto is 50-50 by 2025. They're encouraging women to be inside the entertainment industry, especially animation, because it is historically a very male-dominated field. And another huge thing I found is being nice. If you're not someone that other people want to work with, you're going to get kicked out and you're not going to get hired for things because word gets around, especially in animation, which is a very, tight-knit group. And in my experience, if you bake stuff and bring that into the studio, people are really going to like you. So we're going to bake cookies. Freelance versus salary positions. Does anyone here now do any kind of freelance work? Okay. So like I said, my first jobs out of school were freelance. The pros of that: you get to have your own hours, you can work from home, you get to work in your pajamas. You do get a larger paycheck coming in. However, as I quickly found out my first year, because I just was not paying attention, the taxes really suck after that. You have to be making those payments quarterly when you're working freelance, because otherwise you owe the IRS a bunch of money at the end of the year. And then you also have to stay motivated when working on a project. I found that, if you don't have a deadline or, just the atmosphere of a studio, like making you work, it can be easy to kind of just put it off, and that's not good. You also always have to be on the look for the next job, because, this one finishes and you don't know where your next job is going to come from necessarily. So you kind of always have to be on that hustle for the next thing. So is there anyone here who is like a junior or senior? So have you guys talked about LLCs? No? Okay. So this goes along with being a freelancer, and I won't go into great detail, but LLC stands for Limited Liability Company. And I'm just going to read right off the sheet of paper what an LLC is. When you begin freelancing without any formal business structure in place, the government treats your business as an extension of yourself. That means that you are fully responsible for paying your freelance business taxes on your personal tax return. This is the easiest way to get going, but you do open yourself up to risk. If, for example, you run into any legal trouble, your personal property is at risk. This includes your car, your home, your investment portfolio. I don't think anyone has that right now, but something to keep in mind. An LLC puts up a wall of protection between your personal assets and any liability your freelancing business might face. It offers the same level of protection for company owners for the more traditional company model. However, setting one up and maintaining it does not come close to the requirements of a large corporation. So basically it boils down to, if you're very serious about being a freelancer, LLC is something to definitely look into. I did not follow up with it just because I did end up getting that position at Creative Capers, but I think it's going to be super helpful for anyone going forward to just keep that in mind. And I imagine, just in my experience at school, they did go over that a little bit when we started having classes that talked about, life after graduation, looking for work. All right. So, Creative Capers Entertainment. That's where I am now, and I've been working there since 2016. I'm an animator and designer, and also I have been an animation supervisor on different projects. It's a small boutique studio out in LA. We do a lot of work for larger studios like Disney, Cartoon Network. We've done a bunch of work for these studios in Dubai recently. And my owners are David, Sue, and Terry. Last names are there. Sorry. But they started this studio back in the early 90s because they had been working in the animation industry for a long time, both with Don Bluth. Anyone familiar with him? Mm-hmm. Yeah. They worked on Land Before Time, American Tail, the Dragon Lair video game, and as well as working in Disney and consumer products. And so they decided to go ahead and have their own studio. So one of the projects we work on there is Disney's As Told by Emoji. Anyone familiar with that? Yeah. So we do a lot of work designing all these cute little guys up there. However, we do other work with them. I can't say what. And this is due to NDA. Has anyone heard about that? Yes. Non-disclosure agreements. That's something you're going to run into a lot too. You may be working on something amazing and you want to tell everyone about it, but you can't. Usually, sometimes it's just because you have to wait until the film's out or is being advertised. Or just for whatever reason, you can't because of whatever legal jargon's going on. So in that case, it sucks because then you want to share what you're doing. So, a lot of the work I've been doing with them, I can't share. However, I can use what I've learned to make my own emojis. So I've made my own Grunkle Stan, Harry Potter, and Batman emoji sets for friends and family to use. And, if you can't show what you're making at work, you can still use the tools that you have to make something that you can share. There's always a workaround. But just don't piss off Disney because they'll come after you. Let's see how these guys explain. Okay. So 2 projects that I can talk about. Last year, we did these 2 huge projects for Dubai Motion Gate Park and Dubai City Walk. For Motion Gate Park, it's this big theme park where they have a bunch of rides for a bunch of different Sony properties. One of them is for Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. We made this huge 12-minute long video for a play place they had in the park. And so we had to do a lot of flash animation. All this flash animation you see up here is new stuff that was then interspliced with CGI animation from the film. So all the stuff that'll pop up soon. But all that stuff around was designed and then rigged in Flash and animated by myself. And I love the marshmallow. It's so cute. And then down here, this is for Dubai City Walk, which is this huge outside mall in Dubai. And they wanted a 7-minute short that would play on these huge LED screens that went all around the outside of the mall. And so I only have a short clip here, but this project took, I think, close to 12 months maybe at most for a 7-minute short, just to give you guys an idea of how long an animation production takes for something as short as 7 minutes. This is a really short clip here, just showing one of my animations from it. But I was also in charge of doing a lot of asset design, asset building. By assets, I mean just all these props. All that has to be designed and then built and then colorized and then approved by the client. So it's a huge collaborative process that we go through for each project. And on this one, I was doing a lot of animation supervision because we had a lot of freelancers working with us too. So I was also checking animation and in some cases having to do a lot of fixes. That's one thing you have to do too when you're working with freelancers. Let that finish. Okay, and then I just want to kind of brag because Creative Capers is just a really great place to work. So if you're looking for something, it might not be at a really big studio. Do not completely don't not want to look at other studios. I know we all kind of work at Nickelodeon or Disney or Cartoon Network, but I've found that, you know, sometimes there isn't as much of a really family environment there as you might get at a smaller studio. And also you get a chance to work on so many different projects and wear so many different hats and just do kind of fun internal projects. Like this is a short little flash animation we did because my bosses, Terry and David, they love the old UPA style stuff and they just wanted to play around with it. So I got to animate that for them. And then we also get to make campy home movies where I'm a pirate who fights a stop motion skeleton. That's a lot of fun. Okay. Just going to pause for a second. Does anyone have any, burning questions right now? Yes.
I kind of want to make graphic novels, but I'm really bad at but I feel like I'm really bad at the like panel arrangement and
doing panel. Okay. So our question was making graphic novel, but maybe not being as strong as doing the panel arrangement. In my case, and I'll go into it in just a sec, but the script I got from David and Paul, they actually had a lot of directions for the panels. So I guess it kind of depends on maybe you'll work with someone who is particularly good about that, or maybe really anal about how they want their panels composed. So maybe that's kind of someone that you would work better with as opposed to maybe doing it on your own or having to make up like the panels by yourself. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Perfect. All right, so we'll go into graphic novels. The Margins. This is my very first graphic novel. I'm the illustrator on it. It was written by David Ocampo and Paul Montgomery, two great authors. And it all started with me doing some fan art for a podcast David had made back in 2007. I guess a quick summary of the story. The Margins is about comic artist Charlie Keough. She's just moved to Portland, Oregon with her girlfriend Rita, and they're starting a new life together. And during that time, Charlie she meets up with a author, Gordy, who is making a new comic, and he's the author, and it's based on an old manuscript by his great-grandfather, Kent, who had mysteriously disappeared or died. No one knows for sure. But as she starts working on it and she starts drawing all these fantasy characters, they start coming into the real world of Portland, Oregon, followed by the previous thought deceased Kent, who is not too happy about someone else messing with his world. So it's very much about themes of gatekeeping and dealing with adversity and learning to open up yourself to new experiences. And it's kind of reflected a lot of my own experiences working on the comic. It's very meta. It's a lot of fun. So like I said, started with some fan art. David had written and directed a podcast back in 2007. I think that ran for maybe to 2012, called Wormwood, a Serialized Mystery. And I discovered it when I was working on a freelance project in 2015. At the time, this is a little personal, but I was in a really big rut and kind of facing a lot of just unsure what I was doing. I was living in LA at the time. I wasn't really happy with my job and my art. And just listening to the podcast and the vivid world it brought to mind really inspired me to start drawing again. So I drew some fan art for the show, some character designs, and I posted it on the forum, and I left a message to him saying, hey, this show really means a lot to me. It's really helped get me out of my rut. Here's this. I don't know if I'll ever hear from you, but thank you so much. And I heard back a week later, David saying how much he liked my art and offered me a job illustrating this new graphic novel he was writing. And I had no experience doing comics beforehand, but I thought, why not give it a try? This would give me a chance to have something that was mine that I could put my name on, as opposed to a lot of the collaborative projects I've done at the studio where your name doesn't always end up in the credits. So I was at least once I can get my name on something. And so before I started, because I was a complete novice to this, they introduced me to Barbara and Bryant Dillon, who are the owners of Fanbase Press, the indie publisher for this book. And they had me do a quick test of just 3 pages from the book. And as you can see here, these are the very first thumbnails I worked on. Very rough, character designs not nailed down, but it was enough to get me the job. So once everything was tied down, the first thing I got from them was the character and world Bible. This just basically goes over the most basic stuff in the book, stuff that might have ended up changing along the way, but was like the characters, they were not going to change. Because eventually we got the outline, and that kind of like evolved along the way. Especially as they saw my art and they saw what I could do, they started throwing harder stuff at me, which I hate and love them for because some of it was really challenging. So I first got the characters. They had a lot of examples of actresses they liked. Like for Charlie, I can't remember her name, but she was in, I believe, Scott Pilgrim. She played Knives, I think.
Oh.
Yeah. So this was like a starting point for who would become Charlie Keogh. And up there you can see another early character design sheet, one for Rita Hernandez, her girlfriend, another really early set of character designs. And these evolved as I started getting into actually drawing the book and realizing, oh, I have to draw these guys over and over again. I should simplify some stuff. That's something to keep in mind too. Simplify where you can in animation and comics, because you have to draw that stuff all over the place. So I did character designs first, and see the next page. I have a few more. This was all for the Goblin King, not quite Jareth from Labyrinth, and this is kind of where he ended up being a bit closer to that. And over here you have Simon Kent, our antagonist in the story. You see him when he's younger as well as older, so I was trying out a lot of designs. His harpoon is a big part of his character, so I was trying to nail that down too. So once we had gotten some character designs figured out, I started doing very rough thumbnails. I brought, I think, a bunch, almost all of them with me. But essentially what I would do is that I had the whole script, I printed it out, and in the margins of the script, I would doodle stuff out really quickly just to get it out of my head onto the paper, lightning in a bottle before I forgot about it. So up here you can see it's even tinier up there, got a little bit bigger down there. It's just all over the place. And then after that, I went through most of the script doing that first. And then after that, I went to cleaner thumbnails, which I also have up here. So these are like scaled down versions of the actual size of the page. And from here, this is where I really nailed down like panel layout, helped me figure out the flow from each page, and also helped me figure out what kind of reference I would need for each panel. Like I had to do a bunch of reference of like, what does Portland look like? What does a food truck look like? What does a car look like? I have to draw a car. I don't like drawing cars. Anyone like drawing cars? No, it sucks. But we have Google now, and that's helpful. So you can see a few more pages up here. So and a really good thing about this too is that you can't let yourself get like too precious about a drawing. I started something there, it sucked, I didn't like it, I just moved on to something else until I found something that really felt right. Then pencils. So I'd scan these in, and from that point, it was all digital. So pencils, but it's all in Photoshop. So this, I really tried to nail down, tie it all down to make the next step, inking, a lot easier on me. So you can see here, the background's all fleshed out. I have a bit of tones going on in that one just because it's a really dramatic moment, and I want to remember what I wanted there. Some speed lines. And then the inks, again in Photoshop. So this is where, I've done all the inks, I've done thinning, thickness, all the textures are in. You can see it here in the wood, along with more speed lines. Excuse me. And the colors. It's kind of blowing out up there. So for this book, we had two distinct color styles. The world of Portland, Oregon, or Art World, is a very kind of like monochromatic, almost ink wash look to it. And then you have Elad, which is the fantasy world, which is where Charlie has been pulling stuff out of into the real world. And that's like really saturated, kind of like grossly so. The colors are really bright. And the idea came from Wizard of Oz, the whole going into a fantasy world and everything's bright and colorful. But also that color is meant to express also a bit of danger to it. You see that when things are coming into her world, these little goblin characters, and they're not always so nice. And then I had David DeCampo. He did all the text for it, which is an art into itself, and I'm glad I had him there to do it. So these are finished pages. Okay, so like I said, The Margins is my first graphic novel, and so there was definitely a learning curve to that. A lot of it was just, again, like being a freelancer, you have to make your own hours. You have to stick to your own schedule, especially for this, because at the start, there was no deadline put in front of us. So I was kind of like lollygagging around and drawing when I felt like it. And then they're like, hey, can we get this done by the so-and-so time? And I had nothing done. So I'm like, oh, I should probably get to work on that. Another thing is, this was basically my second full-time job for almost 3 years. So I would be working at Creative Papers during the day, and then this during the evenings on the weekends. No life. I didn't go home for Christmas a couple times. And, just putting this out here, especially when you're working on an independent publisher, books don't pay super well. It's unfortunate, but it's the reality. This has definitely been a labor of love, and I'm so proud of it. And I want it to do good, but you also have to understand that you're not going to be making like J.K. Rowling money on something like this. And like I said, working 2 full-time jobs and time management, no deadline. So if you guys are, interested in doing graphic novels, and say you do it with an independent publisher, as opposed to, say, working for like Marvel or DC, where you're going to have like editors on your back, making sure everything is, coming in a set time. Just know that it's another situation of being your own boss, like working freelance. But there's also the fun stuff. I got to do a bunch of pre-order sketches for the books that came out. You see one up there for Wonder Woman I did for my family members. A lot of interviews about the book. As you can tell right now, I'm not a great public speaker, but doing these interviews has been great practice. And I went to San Diego Comic-Con this past summer. We had a booth there for Fanbase, and I was able to sign books and talk to people. And that is so fun. It's so rewarding getting to see people and see them excited about your book, too. Especially because, one of my favorite stories, we had a podcast review the book called Comadres de Comics, which is run by 3 Latina women. And they love the book. They gave the book a glowing review. And I started crying during work when I was listening to it. But, just hearing people relate to something you've made, like it affects them so much, it affects you. And that's another reason why it just makes it so hugely worth it. And going forward, I've been in talks with David. I've been in talks with a couple of people. I may be doing more comic work. So who knows, in the future, I may, veer away from animation and make graphic novels, something I pursue more than animation. So I guess that's something I also want to put forward to you guys. Like, you may have set plans going forward after school, but those can change on a dime. You might be presented with something that's like you never thought of before, and it just calls to you. And, if you can, go for it, because it may be a huge change in your life for the better. Okay, that's my presentation. Thank you, guys. And now it's up for Q&A. So please give me your cues if you got any. Yes.
I have 2. Is that all right?
Of course.
So I was from my brother, my older brother, like by 5 minutes, who does not go to an art school, but he still likes drawing comics, and he wants to be published one day. Mm-hmm. You sort of answered those 2 questions he had, so I'll just ask, what advice do you have for him as someone
without an artist background?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, what do you say to someone without an artist background who wants to go into a graphic novel, and I assume being an artist on a graphic novel?
Yeah.
Or writing too. You know what? I say go for it. Having a degree is not what makes you the artist. Now, don't drop out of school right now because I'm going to get yelled at because of that. But, there's so many people who are self-taught, and they've gone on to, work in the field successfully. I know a lot of people, just personally working in industry who, maybe went to school for a little bit, found it wasn't working for them, and then, went on to something else, maybe came back, and they're great artists. So if anyone has the drive to do that, I say go for it. And then that also just means you have to really work at networking, or if you're doing it completely on your own, make a presence for yourself online. Like I talked about fan arts, that's how I got this job in the first place. Social media, your Instagram or your Tumblr, putting stuff out there can get you a lot of recognition. I know a lot of people who've also gone and worked, say, as storyboard artists at Cartoon Network, because they posted a lot of art consistently online. they're working as like a barista somewhere, but their art caught someone's attention and they got a job out of that. So it's not unheard of. What, do you have a question? Another one? Yes.
And I, sorry.
From the younger brother by 5 minutes.
Yes.
Yes.
And I want to work in animation one day.
Yes.
And what advice would you have to someone in making, I guess, their own like 5-minute short film?
Okay. It's really hard. Like just doing, you saw a short clip of it before of my short film from school, that's barely clocks in at 1 minute, and that took me, over a year to complete, to get everything done. And a lot of people, unfortunately, in my class were not able to finish it. So if you're thinking of doing it alone, I would also consider doing it with a partner, maybe a couple, maybe get a collaborative effort, because then it's not all on your shoulders, because that's, exhausting to do. Also, if you have a day job going on at the same time, it's not impossible. Like if you really are like, you want to be the sole creative force driving it, I say go for it, but you have to be very determined. You have to have a schedule, a lot of, you have to have your self-imposed deadlines like I was talking about. You are your own boss to get that done. So I'd say go for it, and or consider doing it with a group of people. And then put it out there, put it on YouTube, put it on your Instagram, and see what happens. Yes?
After you graduated, what would you say about your portfolio got you those jobs?
So the question was, what was it about my portfolio that got me my first jobs? So for example, my very first one, the freelance job for the independent filmmaker with like the people in the bathing suits and everything, I think it was just having a completed film on my reel. I think it showed that I was trustworthy, getting the job done. It also helped that he was my professor, so we had that, already existing repartee between each other. But then, for example, the Rainbow Bright job, that was my first in the industry. And I got that, again, because I had finished looking projects on my reel. So it wasn't all like, say, pencil test. It was like fully animated, fully colored. And I think that's what really helped. Also, for Rainbow Bright, they were really desperate for people, so that helps too. When they have to get a project out, they'll kind of take anyone in. But like I said, having finished work, I think really speaks a lot to people. Yes?
Okay, so I have 2 questions. So, what would you recommend for if you're doing comic book work and you're trying to work with like the backgrounds and the settings and then the colorations on that point? That's the first one.
Okay, sorry. Talking makes you belchy. I'm sorry. So you're talking about, so your question is basically how to do backgrounds and everything. Okay, good question, because that's also what I ran into. Backgrounds probably took me the longest working on the book because I was just not used to drawing them. Animation, usually just drawing a character. Or storyboarding, you'll draw the background once just so people know like what it looks like, and then you draw the person moving in front of it. It takes a lot of practice. I looked at a ton of reference for, like I said, for Portland. So I like had Google Maps up and I was like taking screenshots of what houses looked like and, drawing those. It gets a lot trickier when you're making it up yourself, like for all the fantasy scenes, like that huge pirate ship I showed you. That was, again, research. I was just researching, ships, pirates, that Cthulhu-looking creature in the front of it. More research into that. And then just a lot of practice. Color theory is something I still struggle with. I think that's what took me the longest too, was when it came to like those full color pages. So if you struggle with that, while you're in school, is there like a color theory class?
Yeah.
Take that. I did not take that. So take that while you can, or go online. And I know there's a lot of classes online too to help you with that. And a lot of places where you can get critique for that too. That's a huge thing if you're just learning something. Have people who maybe have more experience to help you give critique on what you can improve. That answer your question?
Yeah. And then the second question, let's see here. I know that you got contact to the comic book artist, not comic book artist, to the
the writer,
comic book publishers through the 2 people that you met on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But if you guys got together before you saw the press.
So if I met the publisher first instead. Is that your question?
did you meet the publisher first?
I did not. So I
Okay.
communicated first with the writers and then the publisher.
Okay, so how did they get connected to the publisher and how did they get their book published? And then also, do you need an LLC if you're using like a very disconnected publisher, like if you have almost all of your rights?
Okay, so for the first part, for meeting the publisher first. So from what I understand, David, he's worked in comics before. I think his first comic was Lost Angels. He did that with another publisher, I think it was called Comicer, another really good book. And then I think it was through that he, started talking to Barbara and Bryant. Barbara and Bryant have been working, I forget how long they've been doing this, but for a while. And they're a great couple. They own the publisher. They're so good to work with and very understanding. And he had told me he'd always wanted to do a book with them. So I think it was just him already being in the industry, talking to people. That's how he ended up meeting them. And he just approached them a couple of times with different ideas he had. He's the writer, and so he's like, hey, I have a couple ideas. I think he pitched a couple ideas when he was pitching the margins. And he pitched the margins. And I think another important thing to say is that when he first pitched that, Charlie was a male, actually. And I think he was supposed to be straight. And so Barbara actually said, why not a girl? And why not she have a girlfriend instead? And he was very open, totally open to doing that too. So I think that's something that if you're going and say as a writer or as an artist and a writer, you're pitching something, be open to something your publisher or editor might say, because it can, may change the story, but it can change it for the better too. And your other question was about, the LLC.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat it for me one more time?
I'm just interested if, you were able, if you would ever need an LLC if you were in that type of situation. I mean, I have a lot of questions since I want to go into the field, but I rarely ever meet people who are in the field person to person.
Mm-hmm. So I guess in my case, for working the book, I do not have one because I believe, I think it's a W-2 where you're like a full-time employee. So for them, that's my case. I'm not sure about other people's situations with an indie publisher. Unfortunately, I don't know. That'd be something to do more research on.
Okay.
But so, say if you have a specific publisher in mind, maybe contact them and see what their artists typically do with them.
Okay. Do you know any resources to finding publishers?
I don't, just because this is my first time. I mean, you're welcome to pick up, that's Barbara's card right there. Maybe if you contacted her, she might be able to direct you. But say if you go into a comic store, like the one down the street, and just look at some of the books and see what their publishers are, that'll give you an idea of just how many are out there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Of course, no, it's no problem.
First of all, can I get a copy?
Yes. All right, first one. Thank you. $20 a pop.
And second of all, what I think I meant earlier was more I have a fear of just not doing that well in it.
So the question is, being unsure of yourself and having a fear of doing the comic. Again, that's something I kind of felt the whole time I was working on it. It being my first project, my first graphic novel, you never know what the reaction is going to be. And, even though the whole time I was sending in pages to the publisher and to David and Paul, and they're like, we love it, it looks great. I'm like, but do you really? There has to be something wrong with this. I think in general, just artist to artist, we all kind of have that fear. We're not as good as we think we are. Even though we have people saying it's really good, it's hard to, get rid of. But you just kind of have to push through it. If you think, you're not good enough if there's, a specific thing you feel weak on, say if it's backgrounds, do something where you're just drawing backgrounds, nonstop. Get better at it. I think, the saying is, you're a master after you've done, 1,000 hours of practice or something insane like that. And it's true. You have to practice to get better at it. So, if, say you don't want your first thing to be a graphic novel, start with a webcomic. I think that's great. You don't have to pay anything for that. You just put it on the internet, and then you can get the response from that. And hopefully, if it's not just people being rude because it's the internet, you'll also be getting some critique out of it too. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah.
It does? Okay. Tell me if it doesn't, because I'll come up with something better. Yes, on the left. My left.
Okay. Do you mind talking a little bit more about LLCs, at least what you know about it?
I will. Unfortunately, I don't know a whole lot about LLCs, which is why I read from something I copy and pasted. I think my thing was just to be aware of it going forward. Are you interested in being a freelance artist?
I'm just exploring options.
So that's good. Explore options. I think the big thing is that it protects your assets, your personal things, your home, your car, from, say, if something like terrible goes wrong, you lose a ton of money and the government comes to you and they would take your assets otherwise. This protects you from that. So I would look into it from someone who's more informed than I am. I'm just like the bearer of bad news. Be aware of that.
I can
So-
talk about that. Just
Yes,
So
please.
basically, like when you're working on your own, you're your own company, and so you're liable for everything.
Mhm.
So, as in, like, if you suddenly run into a lot of debt or something, they can take your money. Like you said earlier, they can
Yeah.
take your money and things like that. So you're literally liable from your own personal savings and other things that you have. Whereas if you make yourself into an LLC, you're under a company, so to say. So like it's just a different category
Mhm.
of being. So you'll still be you doing your own things, but you'll be considered this thing instead.
Yeah.
And so that basically just protects you. So it's because it's called limited liability. Your personal things that you own yourself, like your house and whatever, that'll be then protected from being part of the liability and being liquidated and stuff like that. So it's just another way to protect yourself from that.
Yeah.
Like how do you get it?
Thank you. Yes.
So I was interested in building audience and how important that is, especially before publishing for things like graphic novels.
Mhm.
So how did you go about building an audience and how important is that?
So the question is building an audience before you publish your graphic novel. In my case, I didn't really have one. You know, on Instagram, I don't have that many followers, but that's why I think in my case, having the publisher was a huge help. Like, say if I had done this like completely on my own, done a Kickstarter to publish everything, it would have turned out really differently. But because I have the publisher, they do a ton of advertising for it. They have the Facebook page, they have their own website, they go to conventions where they have the books sold and they have pamphlets for it and everything. And they also set up interviews for all of us to do. A lot of Skype interviews we did at San Diego Comic-Con. So that's, so if you are, say, in the situation as myself where you're working with a publisher, that is their job to be doing that, to get an audience. And like specifically for this book where it is about two young women of color in a relationship with each other, they did reach out to like specific websites and people who'd be interested, like the Comadres de Comics podcast through Latina women. They were really drawn to it. We did a interview for two gay geeks trying to review the book. So I think that also helped too, because then they are speaking to an audience that they think the book will most relate to. So if you're not like a huge deal on Instagram, the publisher will help you to build an audience for you. Does that help? Cool.
How is the book doing?
It's doing pretty good, I think. At Comic-Con, I think we sold like 40 copies, which is good for an indie book. You know, you got DC there, you got Marvel there. So the fact we sold any is huge for us, I think.
Have you been selling digital copies online?
We do also sell digital copies. If you go to the website, themarginscomic.com, we do have links to buying it digitally instead. But it's also here in physical form, so just in case.
You can touch it.
You can touch it, you can flip through it before you buy it. If you want to buy it, go for it.
You
Would
get
you say
different
that
edit
digital
reviews.
sales are more than the physical sales? Or?
Physical sales are more for us
Oh.
because the digital one is also less.
Oh.
Yeah. I forget how much less it is, but it's not $20. Did I see another hand? No. Yes.
So if you could like go back in time and tell yourself as an aspiring animator, as a sophomore specifically, not to generalize,
This is for anyone specific,
just
no?
anyone in I guess art school, about the field that you haven't said already, what would you say that they need to brush up on and prepare for?
Okay. So if I were to go back and tell myself as a young artist in school what to prepare for, I would say get good. Looking back at where I was as a sophomore, I was, nowhere where I am today. And, that also hangs on me. I needed to do more personal work. I needed to go to figure drawing classes on my own. I needed to do work outside of just my school work, because sometimes your school assignments are not specifically what you want to be doing. Like if it's animation, you need to be starting animation already. There's like nothing impeding you nowadays from just animating. Like just get Flash. We all have Flash now with Adobe Suite or whatever it's called. I think it's Animate now. You can also get trials for Toon Boom and Harmony and all that too to start getting better into it. Or if you're say into CGI, I think you can get a trial for Maya and you can get student discounts for Maya too. So there's so many options now for you if you want to do animation to start in it right now. And it does take a lot of time and dedication, and it's really hard when you're first starting out. But if you're passionate about it, which I think you have to, especially for comics and animation, because they're sequential storytelling. You're drawing that same person over and over again to get the story across. So you have to really love it. So I would tell myself, get back in your room and practice. Get off of Tumblr. Get off the internet. You have to draw something right now. That's what I say to myself. Bridget. Anything else? Yes.
It's maybe a little bit personal, and you're free to not tell me, but what type of revenue comes in from those books towards you personally?
So we're talking of revenue. Like I had mentioned before, doing something indie, it does not pay super well going forward. And something that you run into too is that you have to pay back the printer first before you start seeing anything yourself. So we're actually still in the process of paying back the printer right now. So I'm actually not sure when myself and my two authors are going to be seeing much coming back. It's just kind of, what happens. But like I mentioned before, I have been in talks to work on future projects. So, it sucks because we want to make a living off our work, but I have a chance to maybe do another project coming up where, I get myself more out there. I get to do another fun project. Maybe by the time that one's done, I'll see something from this. But then that also means, I do still have my day job at Creative Capers, which is not a bad thing. I love working there. Like I mentioned before, for me, a small studio is a great place to work at because I get to do so many things. And I took 3 months off from working there to work on this book specifically with nothing else going on. I don't know that I could have done that anywhere else and gone back and got my job back from there. So that is something to keep in mind. Doing something independently, the finances are not always too great. That's just the reality of it. Does that help?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, of course. I am ready to bare my soul. Yes.
You said you're not originally from the LA area, right?
Yes.
How was it, the process of actually moving out there and adjusting to such a radically different place?
Right. So yes, I grew up in Michigan. I went to school in Minnesota, so I'm very much Midwest, snow, all that. So when it came to moving out there, I was actually offered a room in a house by my still current roommates. She's a stop motion animator, and we had gone to MCAT together too. And so she was like, hey, I have a room opened up. She doesn't completely hate me. She thought I'd be a good roommate, and so she offered that to me. And so I moved out with kind of the bare minimum of stuff, because luckily that place I moved into was already fully furnished. So I moved out, my bags, my books, my tablet, and everything I would need to continue working freelance, as I also looked for my job, which was the Rainbow Bright thing. And then from there, we lived in that house together for, I want to say, almost a year before we moved out to our own place. And that's when I, kind of really started having to build up my own life there, so to speak. I had to furnish my apartments and all that stuff. So I actually, I had a really lucky start. I lived somewhere where the rent was low, which is shocking for LA, especially for Burbank. That's something to keep in mind too. The rent there is ridiculous. So if you can get something with a roommate that's not insane and not also roach infested, be aware of that too out there. You should go for that when you can. And I also went out there with work still. I was still working the freelance job, like I said. I have friends who are animators who are out there. They're great animators, and I try so hard to pass on any news I can of other jobs to them, because like I was saying, you want to pay it forward. If you get something in industry and you know someone who's a great artist then that could use a job, let them know about it. The WIA group, the Women in Animation, they send out job emails, so I'm sure to pass those out to everyone I know. So here's an opening, apply for it, do it because you're awesome. And I also will, because we're a small studio, we'll have freelancers in a lot. So I'll pass on that news to people. Hey, you should apply for this. Hey, I know a person who's really good at Flash animation. Let's bring them in. Because, a lot of people I know are doing non-art jobs when they move out there and they're trying to find something. That's something that happens too, unfortunately. Did I answer your question?
Perfect.
Yes.
Oh, one more question
yes.
after So would you recommend, because I'm sure, like you did the poll before, a lot of people want to move out west,
Mhm.
and a lot of people want to live in Los Angeles. Do you recommend getting a job there first and then going?
I would, yeah. Like I said, my roommate, something she said to me was like, you need to have a job first before moving out here. Otherwise, you kind of flounder around sometimes. I'm sorry. If you can get something, but another thing that you sometimes run into is that they won't hire someone who is out of state, like for an in-house job. They want you to already be out there. So maybe find someone you can like use their address for when applying for something, or go out there and maybe like stay for a little bit. Maybe it's a hotel or you stay with a friend and you start applying for stuff. Or say if you're doing internship, like apply for that and go out there for that. It's hard, but you just got to work really hard for it, or you have someone in there and can get you something. Like I said, nepotism runs rampant in LA. It's ridiculous. Sorry. That answer your question?
Perfectly.
Perfect. Cool. Anything else? Yes.
Okay. Was there a little in-between period from when you graduated college and when you got your first job, or was it like even before you graduated college or right after or something like that, dealing with art? I mean, like, of course, like, you'd have to have a job in order to live, so.
I'm trying to think. So I graduated 2013 in the winter. I think I went home for a little bit. Like I mentioned, the freelance job for the independent filmmaker, I think I started that like after I came back to Minnesota from being home for a little bit. So that was probably like the end of January. So luckily for me, I was able to get something right away. But at the same time, I was still doing a part-time job at like a children's theater that was nearby. So still, even then, I had to be working 2 jobs to, make it count. Because, a lot of these freelance stuff, especially when you're starting out, they're not going to pay too well. So you want to be doing that art job, but you still might need a retail job or something on the side. It kind of just depends on what you're able to get. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Anything else? Did I bore your guys' ears off enough? Perfect. All right. Well, I think that's it. Thank you guys again so much for coming. And it's been great. Like I said, books up here if anyone's interested, even just to flip through. I also brought more examples of the thumbnails if anyone wanted to see my process. I also have bookmarks, business cards, and pamphlets for Fan-Based Press and their other books that they sell. All right. You're free.
And there's
And there's candy. Don't forget candy.
Thanks. Oh my god. Oh, this thing's so much.